Myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. It's my understanding Mr. Rezar and Mr. Smith will not be here today. I'd like to go through the agenda on the closed session items 1 through 8, 7 and 8. If there's specific items on those items we can discuss in closed sessions, we'll come back and deal with them in the regular session as to relates to the approval of those two reports. So with that, also on consent, if we can do 9, 11, and 12.
What were the first ones you said?
1 through 8 in closed session.
Yeah.
7 and 8 only if you have specific items as to cases. And then consent 9, 11, and 12.
Yeah, fine with me.
Okay. Good.
We're going to executive session.
The regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee is back in session. We have a quorum, Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Rosenthal, myself, Bernard Parks as chair. We're going to, rather than address 7 and 8, as we mentioned earlier, they're going to be continued to next meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Next item.
The remaining item on the open agenda is item number 10, Board of Police Commissioners and CAO reports relative to a grant application for the 2008-2009 Forensic Casework DNA Backlog Reduction Program.
We have staff.
I'll call the CAO, but for the interim, why don't the police department representatives come up?
Good afternoon. Let me just start off and ask on the, Mr. Weezer did a motion that related to the controller's audit. Has the department responded to the controller's audit yet?
Not yet.
The controller's audit of,
Official response is being prepared right now.
okay, October 20th, okay. Wait, let me ask Mr. Gruhl to lead this one on the DNA.
Yes.
I just have, because of the audit, I think the question was, can you tell us a little bit about this particular grant and how it relates to the grant where there was some, I guess, something fell through the cracks, I suppose to say.
Well, this is the 2008 DNA grant is the grant that was reduced by the $500,000. And when they made the decision about the 2008 grant, they looked at the spending on the 2006 grant to see where we were. And although all the money had been expended, it had not been reported to DOJ and the money had not been drawn down. So from their perspective, the funds had not been expended. So that put us in the jeopardy of not getting the full allocation. At this point, though, so that's the short answer to your
And
question.
so this $436,000 is less than what we would have received because of that.
Right.
And is there any way in which to say to DOJ and demonstrate to them we expended this
Right.
money to get the second level?
In fact, I have a letter that is going through the chain of command at the police department asking for them to reconsider. When we spoke with them at the time that when we received this notification, they hinted around that there may be some funds that had unspent funds that we could perhaps ask for. So this letter is basically reporting what our expenditures have been so far, which have been we've accelerated considerably to see whether or not they can augment this out of the 2008 to give us additional funds.
Because we would have gotten close to $1 million, is
Right.
that correct on this
Right.
item? Which, could be useful as we just went through the whole DNA thing
Right.
a few weeks ago. Would it help as well for the mayor and council? I mean, as well to, in addition to the chief of police, sending a letter saying, although our department didn't report that they had expended these, here are the reasons why, and the same kind of thing, and action by the council.
I would think that would,
I don't think
it would hurt. Anything,
I guess, and then the second question would be, has the department made the necessary changes to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
absolutely.
And what would those be?
Well, we have developed a tracking system that will, so that everybody has the supervision plus our end users, in this case SID, has a real clear picture of where we are in terms of the expenditures from the grant, what our deadlines are, where we are in terms of coming up against deadlines. Those are systemic problems that we're fixing as it relates to all of our grants. On this grant, I'm watching it very, very closely. I can tell you right now how much money is left. We're closing out grants. We expect to have the 2006 grant only has $2 left in it. We're going to be closing that out this month. The 2007, we expect to have expended all the funds by the end of December, and we'll be closing that out in January. That'll be the grant that they'll be looking at, the 2007, when they're making the 2009 allocation. And we know that they look at your expenditures from January and March to make those determinations. So when they look at our expenditures on the 2007 in January, they'll see that substantially most of those funds have been expended. Another thing that we're able to do is when you're at a 90% expenditure rate, you can request from DOJ that they allow you to begin spending on the next grant so that there's a seamless flow of money. Because
Have we done that previously?
we have done that. We didn't do that on this 2006, 2007. That's one of the problems that we fixed. So greater communication was one of the major problems that we had there, and we've done a number of things to address the communication problems.
Okay, and you said, I think I heard you say that the response back to the controller's audit, you're drafting that now, the department is responding to that.
Yes, that's right.
And that'll outline some of those things as well.
Absolutely.
I was just going to suggest that we include some action by the city council and a correspondence that would be signed by the mayor and council to go with the chief's letter asking DOJ to identify additional funds because of a problem occurring in the department that it shouldn't impact our funding for this particular program.
Makes sense, obviously. Yep.
One thing maybe you could help me on, when reading the controller's audit, it's kind of difficult to determine how much work would have been done ordinarily and how much was actually done by the grant. And you get a lot of numbers, but I can't really make sense out of whether most of those numbers would have occurred with or without the grant or with the regular personnel. And I was wondering, is there a sense of, in these 4 years with $4 million in grants, what was actually the workload or the equipment that we would not have done without the grant? Do we have any sense of that? Because one of the things that in the controller's audit, they mentioned that they asked at one time, there was in August, that they said that something like 400 tests were conducted due to the grants, and then later it was revised to 700 tests, but they were unclear as to the accuracy of either figure. And do we have a sense of what the grant has produced, or the grants?
The several grants could have been used for a variety of things, contracting out primarily, but also equipment and overtime for our own staff and training. So I would have to get a breakdown for each grant individually for you.
Yeah, because I know they have some figures here that show some of the figures for equipment and travel, but I can't get a sense of, when it's all said and done, how many actual samples were analyzed, how many, and it doesn't even come close to how many cases were solved, but they give us a breakdown as of June 30th that there was $1 million used in equipment, $700,000 for consultants, $80,000 for supplies, but they never quite get around to saying, of the consultants, $750,000, it produced X number of samples or whatever. It doesn't on the equipment. And this is a second question I had, is that each one of these grants appear to fall into either personnel costs, equipment costs, travel, or overtime. And I'm just wondering, after 4 years, what equipment are we buying to continue buying equipment, or would we be better off putting money into the vendors that give us almost a net return on cases? And I'm just trying to sense, after 4 years, are we still buying equipment? Is there equipment that's already there in the lab that could facilitate? Are we upgrading it? What are we doing with, because we're spending more on equipment, at least as of June 30th, than anything else.
Well, a couple of those grants were called capacity enhancement grants, and there's two things that we need to do in the city of LA, and one is to build our own infrastructure internally so that we're able to do everything coming in the door. Right now, we're not there, and that creates our backlog. It contributes to our backlog. So the second piece is to get rid of the backlog. So we're working it from two ends, building our infrastructure and then working our backlog. The capacity enhancement grants allow us to build up our in-house capacity, and that's buying the equipment that we need to support the analysts that you've recently gave us, 16 positions, and a few last year, and hopefully some more next year. So we're using the grant money to buy the equipment that those people will be utilizing. We're also looking at new equipment as it comes out. Some of the new equipment allows us to do things a lot faster, so we buy that stuff and move more cases that way as well. It's a whole balancing act. We're looking to increase our staff in-house, get the right equipment here, keep up with what's coming in the door, and then work that backlog as well.
Okay. One of the things that the controller mentions as a criticism is that, I guess up until recently, we were only using one vendor, and then after the backlog or whatever, we decided to go out to 2 additional vendors. Is that capacity been resolved?
Not quite. We did an RFP a few years back, and it netted one vendor, and we had that vendor roughly 5 years. We did another RFP probably 9 months, 10 months ago, and we were able to get 4 vendors. So we now have 4 vendors. 2 are large companies that can handle greater volume, and 2 are very small. They can only handle a couple cases a month. But we do have a greater capacity now than we ever have, and we will be utilizing that because we do have a lot of contracting money now.
Okay, are the vendors at capacity now?
They have just submitted letters to me about 2 weeks ago saying they can increase capacity to the dollars that we have been given. So I think we will be in good shape. However, we need to act on that quickly because, as you've probably read, the sheriff is going through the same issues, and they will be also seeking to use essentially the same vendors because there are a limited number of them. So if we don't act, we could end up losing that capacity to them.
Now, with them on RFP, is there a contract for them to take certain capacity, or is it based on what we have available? How do we secure our future that they're going to take some of our workload?
They do have limits on the grant, but we asked if they had additional capacity, and they have said that they do, the 2 large ones, and they can handle everything that we have money for now, but that could change if the sheriff gets in the game.
Okay. Let me just say, one of my concerns in reading some of this is that, and we all know the budget situation is somewhat of a concern, is that we not get to the point of we buy equipment and then not have people to sit there and use it, or that we are depending on a multi-year hiring program that doesn't come about, and yet we've invested in materials that could have maybe been in the long term put into the vendors to where you can have an ongoing amount of work being done. And I would just hope that we'd be balancing that, because I don't know today whether we can assure you of a 3 or 4 year hiring plan. And as you know, the worst thing is to have seats available and you can't fill them, or to have new equipment in the box that nobody can look at, and have the backlog continuing. And so I'd hope we keep balancing that as to not just this year, but next year. And, as we discussed during the deliberations about the 16 new positions, it's going to take you a while to hire them. It's going to take you a while to train them. And we hope you don't get, as both of you know, you've been there long enough to know, just as you get them online, is that the time for the cutback and the freeze, just as you've gotten them on board. And so we go through that all the time on this push and pull on personnel and whether they're there for the long term or do we get them, and just as we get them, something else causes them to disappear, or we can't train them, or we don't, those type of things. So I'd hope we keep that balance because it is an important issue, and I think with Prop 69, it's just going to get more work. And as we get more and more people coming into prison and getting put into the system, it's just going to be more and more work to click. And eventually, I think Ms. Chick was accurate. At some point, and I think we tried to do this years ago, that for every police officer gets hired, does that mean X number of analysts, X number of clerk typists? Because you can't just have them out there with no support. And I think if that went by the wayside several years ago, but at least there was an attempt to say for every 10 police officers, you need 1 point something this. And it seems like maybe that is another way to begin to look to make sure that the analysts are growing at the same rate as the police department.
Well, we're being very careful about the purchasing of equipment to match the increased number of personnel, and we're able to use these grant funds to purchase the equipment. So when we're given funds for salaries and the authority to hire, we're actually using the grant money to purchase the equipment for these people. So it's really kind of a one-to-one. And the other thing is these grants have been restructured so that they're no longer just looking at DNA contracting money and capacity buying equipment. They've combined them into a single grant, and the agency is allowed to determine what's the best mix of contracting equipment and overtime. So there's a little bit more flexibility that DOJ has been granting us.
And when we use the word equipment, we're actually talking about hardware that's available in the lab as versus supplies. It's not disposable.
There's two things. There's consumable supplies that they need, the reagents and the like. That's a requirement.
I mean, is that under equipment or is that
That's a supply.
supplies?
That's an expense item. When you see supplies here, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about paper and pens and, paper clips. That comes out of our general fund.
When we say equipment, we're talking about hardware that's reusable.
Pieces of testing equipment that they need at their desks.
Question is, how big is our backlog now, and how much of this 400 plus 436K make a dent in that?
Our backlog now is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7,100 cases. Each sample costs us roughly $1,000 to process. So out of the 435, you see contract lab services is 185,000 and change. So that'll get us, 180 cases.
So we'll be able to reduce our load by 180 cases with this grant?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Parks' questions about the other vendors. Do we have enough vendors? Because the county's going to make a push too. Everybody's going to make a push. Do we got more under discovery? Can we bring more in so we don't get held up because we don't have it?
The nice thing about the publicity that we've gotten on this issue is that we have people coming to us now saying, hey, maybe we can help you. So we're exploring those avenues now to see if they are really legit and if they really do meet the qualifications, they're certified and everything. And then we'll present that and see if the city wants to hire on a couple more.
Okay, well, we definitely don't want to hold up, if we have the money, any kind of investigation of any of the backlog cases, okay? And now that you took our numbers down by 140, did you just say, or so roughly, did I hear you right, from the 700 and something? So to get the additional ones underway, what are we looking at? Additional money?
Gosh, I can't remember it off the top of my head. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million to do the whole backlog.
Okay. And are we going to make an effort under this Hope and Change Day of the nation to get more monies out of the feds for that $5 million now? So
Absolutely.
that we can expedite it? I don't want to go incremental. I just like to grab it all and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always exploring all our options for grants. Also, because of the sheriff's publicity, we also were notified by DOJ that they are interested in helping both our agencies, and possibly they may allow some more money towards this.
You're hearing
issue.
that, I'm just curious, are we coordinating with the sheriff, so we're not competing, but we're working as a team?
That's the beauty of us being in the same building with them. We do a lot of things as teams, and we probably will work on this as well.
Let me just ask, when you respond and you say it's in the process of being written to the controller's audit, because they mentioned on their back page that there's something like $4.3 million in grant money. Is there some way you can distinguish what actual work it produced? So that-
Absolutely.
So we can have some idea versus what the regular lab is doing, what this money has done, so we can get some idea of how it fits in the larger picture.
Absolutely.
And then also if we can add on the report a request that, as Ms. Gruhl asked for the letter of support, is that to DOJ? Federal DOJ or state?
Yes.
Federal DOJ?
Yes.
Requesting support letter in conjunction with the mayor and the city council to ask for additional funding in light of the loss of the almost $500,000 of the 08 grant. Anything else? Okay, we'll move that item with those two instructions.
Thank you.
That concludes the agenda.
Thank you.